My name is, and I am a reconnaissance officer for the Empire. For 30 cycles, I have served aboard star cruisers, mapping unknown systems and cataloging primitive species for potential integration into our vast dominion. I have seen civilizations rise and fall, witnessed the brutal efficiency of our conquest fleets, and observed countless worlds bend the knee to might. Nothing in my experience prepared me for what I would witness when we encountered the species that calls itself humanity. It began as routine surveillance of the Sol system, an unremarkable star cluster on the outer rim of what humans call the Milky Way galaxy. Our deep space scouts had detected electromagnetic signatures indicating a developing technological civilization. The initial reports suggested a typical Class 3 species, barely capable of interplanetary travel, with primitive weapons and fractured political systems. Perfect candidates for swift conquest and resource extraction. I was assigned to the reconnaissance vessel Shadow of Dominion, tasked with conducting detailed observations before the arrival of the main invasion fleet. Our ship possessed advanced stealth technology that rendered us invisible to human detection methods. We positioned ourselves in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, far enough to avoid detection yet close enough to monitor their communications and military capabilities. The first thing that struck me about humans was their incredible diversity. Unlike most species we had encountered, they seemed to exist in countless physical variations. Their skin ranged from pale cream to deep brown, their hair from golden yellow to midnight black. Their languages numbered in the hundreds, their cultures vastly different across their single world. By all logical assessment, such diversity should have made them weak, divided, incapable of unified resistance. Commander, a veteran of 17 successful conquests, dismissed them entirely after reviewing our preliminary data. "Look at their pathetic attempts at space exploration," he said, manipulating the holographic display showing human spacecraft. "Chemical propulsion, crude metallurgy, no energy shields. Their largest space station holds fewer than 10 individuals. They cannot even maintain permanent settlements on their own moon." The commander was technically correct. Human technology lagged centuries behind capabilities. Their weapons were kinetic projectiles and chemical explosives, laughably primitive compared to our plasma arrays and molecular disruptors. Their fastest ships would require decades to travel distances our vessels covered in days. Their military forces seemed hopelessly fragmented among dozens of nation-states, each with different equipment, training, and objectives. Yet something about the humans troubled me during those early observation periods. While monitoring their communications, I noticed patterns that did not align with typical pre-conquest civilizations. Despite their technological limitations, humans displayed remarkable ingenuity in overcoming obstacles. They had successfully landed robotic explorers on multiple worlds in their system using nothing but mathematical precision and chemical rockets. Their scientists collaborated across political boundaries to operate massive research installations in Antarctica and particle accelerators that stretched for kilometers underground. Most disturbing were the historical records we intercepted. Humans had been waging warfare for their entire recorded history, developing increasingly sophisticated methods of destruction. They had split the atom and created weapons capable of destroying cities. They had engineered biological agents that could kill millions. They had even developed theoretical concepts for planetary-scale destruction, though they lacked the technology to implement such ideas. "Irrelevant," Commander declared when I presented these concerns. "Every species wages war. These humans are no different, merely less advanced. Their population centers are concentrated and poorly defended. Their military infrastructure is obvious and vulnerable. We will begin with targeted strikes against their major cities, then demand surrender. Standard protocol." I wanted to believe the commander was right. The humans did appear vulnerable by every conventional metric. Their space-based assets consisted of a few satellites and a single space station. They had no planetary defenses, no unified command structure, no technology capable of threatening ships. A single cruiser could devastate their entire civilization within days. My unease grew as we continued surveillance. Humans demonstrated a peculiar psychological profile that standard models. When faced with natural disasters, they showed remarkable cooperation and resilience. During a massive earthquake that destroyed several cities, I watched in fascination as humans from around the world mobilized resources and personnel to assist the victims. They seemed to possess an almost irrational drive to help members of their own species, even at great personal cost. More concerning was their response to historical threats. Time and again, When faced with existential challenges, humans had shown a capacity for rapid adaptation and desperate innovation. During their global conflicts, they had developed new technologies at unprecedented rates. Radar, jet engines, computers, nuclear weapons, rockets, all created under the pressure of survival. They seemed to become more dangerous when cornered, not less. I compiled detailed behavioral analysis reports highlighting these unusual characteristics. The humans' tendency to unite against external threats, their ability to rapidly develop new technologies when motivated by survival, their apparent willingness to sacrifice everything for abstract concepts like freedom or revenge. Commander dismissed my concerns as overthinking. "You have been in deep space too long," he said with amusement. "These patterns exist in many species. Cooperation during natural disasters is logical. Technological advancement during warfare is expected. You are seeing threats where none exist." Perhaps the commander was correct. Perhaps I had spent too much time observing humans, developing an irrational appreciation for their potential. But I could not shake the feeling that we were underestimating them. Their communications revealed a species that had survived ice ages, eruptions, plague outbreaks, and asteroid impacts. They had endured global wars that killed hundreds of millions, yet emerged stronger than before. They possessed something that pure logic could not quantify. The invasion fleet arrived in the Sol system on what humans called December 7th, exactly 80 years after their own infamous Day of Infamy at Pearl Harbor. The irony was lost on Commander, though I found it ominous. The fleet consisted of 47 vessels, including 3 dreadnought-class battleships capable of cracking continents, more than sufficient to conquer a primitive world with no meaningful space defenses. Our opening strike targeted 17 major population centers simultaneously: Mumbai, Tokyo, New York, London, Moscow, Beijing. Cities containing tens of millions of humans vaporized in seconds by focused plasma bombardments. The attacks were precisely calculated to demonstrate overwhelming superiority while leaving sufficient population alive for forced labor and resource extraction. Initial human response matched our projections. Mass panic, communication breakdowns, complete disruption of civilian infrastructure. Their military forces scattered, unable to coordinate effective resistance against an enemy they could not reach. Several smaller nations immediately broadcast surrender messages, begging for mercy and offering unconditional submission. Commander was pleased with the operation's efficiency. "See how they crumble," he said, watching the chaos unfold on our monitoring screens. 24 hours and they will be begging to serve the Empire, standard conquest timeline. But even as human civilization appeared to collapse, I noticed disturbing anomalies. Despite losing major cities, human communication networks remained partially functional. Military units that should have been paralyzed by command structure destruction continued operating with remarkable autonomy. Most unsettling, humans were not behaving like any other conquered species in my experience. Instead of mass surrenders, we intercepted transmissions filled with rage and determination for revenge. Instead of refugees fleeing conflict zones, we observed civilians organizing resistance networks and improvising weapons. Instead of despair, humans seemed to be experiencing something our translators struggled to define: a collective fury that transcended individual survival instincts. "They are simply in shock," Commander explained when I reported these observations. "Denial is a common initial response to conquest. Within days, reality will overcome emotion, and they will accept their new circumstances." The commander was wrong. As hours passed, human resistance intensified rather than diminished. Their remaining military forces began coordinating attacks against our landing parties, using tactics that demonstrated deep understanding of asymmetric warfare. They targeted our supply lines, communication relays, and isolated units with precision strikes that should have been impossible for such a primitive species. More disturbing was the speed of their technological adaptation. Within hours of our initial attack, humans had begun reverse engineering wreckage from our damaged scouts. Their scientists worked with desperate efficiency, sharing information across what remained of their global communication networks. They were learning, adapting, improving at a rate that violated every model in our databases. On the second day, humans achieved something that should have been impossible. Using modified ballistic missiles armed with nuclear warheads, they successfully destroyed one of our frigates in low orbit. The ship's shields should have been impervious to such primitive weapons, but humans had somehow calculated the exact frequency modulations needed to penetrate our defenses. Commander was furious but not yet concerned. "Lucky shot," he declared. "Increase patrol patterns and maintain higher orbits. They cannot repeat such success." But the humans did repeat it, again and again, with increasing sophistication and lethality. They began launching coordinated attacks using every available weapon system, from intercontinental ballistic missiles to improvised orbital debris weapons. They somehow managed to network their remaining satellites into targeting systems that could track our stealth technology. Most impossibly, they were manufacturing new weapons faster than we could destroy their production facilities. By the third day, I realized we were not fighting a typical pre-conquest civilization. We were fighting something unprecedented in military history. The humans were not trying to survive our invasion. They were trying to win a war against a technologically superior enemy through pure determination and desperate innovation. Their transformation was terrifying to witness. The scattered, divided species we had observed during reconnaissance had unified into something resembling a single organism focused entirely on our destruction. Political boundaries meant nothing. Religious differences were set aside. Ancient hatreds were forgotten. Every human on their planet seemed dedicated to a single purpose, making us pay for what we had done to their cities. The turning point came when humans achieved something our military analysts had declared impossible. Using their crude chemical rockets as delivery systems, they had somehow weaponized their nuclear arsenal into planet-cracking devices. Not through advanced technology, but through the simple expedient of building bombs so large and numerous that they could shatter continents if detonated simultaneously. "Impossible," Commander repeated as our sensors detected the massive weapon signatures. "They lack the industrial capacity for such construction. Our bombardments destroyed their major manufacturing centers." But humans had not relied on centralized manufacturing. They had distributed production across thousands of hidden facilities, using their diverse global infrastructure in ways we had never anticipated. Every remaining factory, laboratory, and workshop had been converted to weapons production. They were literally transforming their entire civilization into a war machine designed for one purpose: mutual assured destruction on a cosmic scale. The message they transmitted to our fleet was simple and terrifying in its absolute certainty. "Leave our system now, or we will detonate these weapons and ensure that neither our species nor yours survives this encounter. We would rather die free than live as slaves." Commander attempted to call their bluff, believing no rational species would choose extinction over survival. He had never encountered humans before. I had spent months observing them, and I knew they were not bluffing. These were the descendants of warriors who had charged machine gun nests, pilots who had flown suicide missions against enemy fleets, soldiers who had held positions against impossible odds rather than retreat. They meant every word. The deadlock lasted 72 hours. 72 hours during which two civilizations stared at each other across the void of space, each capable of destroying the other, neither willing to blink first. I had never experienced anything like it in my 30 cycles of military service. The humans had somehow managed to hold an entire invasion fleet hostage with weapons that should not have existed and tactics that conventional military logic. Commander paced the bridge of our command vessel like a caged predator. The situation was unprecedented in military history. No primitive species had ever successfully threatened mutual destruction against the Empire. Our standard protocols had no contingency for enemies willing to commit species-level suicide rather than accept conquest. "They are bluffing," the commander repeated for the 100th time, though his certainty had visibly wavered. "No rational species would choose extinction over integration into the Empire. They will surrender when they understand the futility of resistance." I was no longer certain the humans were rational by our standards. During those 3 days of tense standoff, I monitored their communications continuously. Instead of despair or gradual acceptance of defeat, I witnessed something that chilled my circulatory system. The humans were becoming more determined with each passing hour, more unified, more dangerous. Their global communication networks, damaged but not destroyed by our initial attacks, carried messages that logical explanation. Instead of surrender negotiations or peace offerings, humans were transmitting what their languages called final messages to loved ones. Soldiers recording goodbye videos for families they would never see again. Scientists documenting their research for posterity. Artists creating final works of beauty before the end. They were preparing for death, but not with despair, with defiance, with pride, with something our translation system struggled to interpret but which seemed to combine love, rage, and absolute determination into a single overwhelming emotion. Most disturbing were the messages directed at us. Humans had somehow detected our surveillance equipment and were transmitting deliberate communications to the fleet. Not surrender offers or negotiation attempts, but warnings, testimonials, historical lessons about what happened to those who underestimated human resolve. One transmission particularly unsettled me. A human military leader speaking directly to our ships said, "You have made one critical error in your calculations. You assumed we value our own lives more than our freedom. You assumed we fear death more than slavery. You assumed wrong. We have been fighting and dying for abstract principles for thousands of years. We will not stop now." Another transmission came from a human scientist who had somehow deduced details about our technology from analysis of weapon debris. "Your weapons are impressive, but you do not understand the weapon you are truly fighting. You are not fighting our ships or our missiles or our armies. You are fighting an idea. The idea that conscious beings should determine their own fate. Ideas are harder to kill than cities." The humans were not merely threatening mutual destruction. They were attempting to teach us something about their species, something they believed we needed to understand before making our final decision. They wanted us to comprehend exactly what we were choosing to fight. During this period, human resistance activities intensified rather than diminished. Their remaining military forces launched increasingly sophisticated attacks against our ground positions. They had somehow developed countermeasures for our plasma weapons and energy shields. Their tactics evolved daily, adapting to our responses with frightening speed. Most impressive was their ability to maintain coordination despite massive infrastructure damage. We had destroyed their primary government centers, their major communication hubs, their largest military installations. Yet human resistance networks functioned with remarkable efficiency across their entire planet. Local commanders made decisions with the authority of heads of state. Scientists shared critical research across vast distances using improvised communication methods. Civilians organized themselves into support networks that kept essential services functioning in war zones. I began to understand that we had fundamentally human civilization. What we had interpreted as weakness, their political divisions, their cultural diversity, their seemingly chaotic social structures, was actually a form of strength we had never encountered. Humans were not unified by central authority like society. They were unified by shared concepts that transcended individual survival instincts. On the fourth day, humans demonstrated the true extent of their desperation and innovation. They had somehow managed to construct a weapon that violated several fundamental principles of physics as we understood them. Using their primitive nuclear technology as a foundation, they had created what their scientists called quantum cascade bombs devices that could theoretically trigger chain reactions in the quantum foam underlying spacetime itself. Our science officers initially dismissed these weapons as impossible. "Chemical-based nuclear fusion cannot achieve such effects," chief scientist declared. "Their mathematics are fundamentally flawed. These devices cannot function as described." The humans proved our science officers wrong by detonating one of these weapons in their outer solar system, targeting a large asteroid to demonstrate the effect. The explosion did not simply destroy the asteroid. It created a localized space-time distortion that persisted for hours, generating gravitational anomalies that affected objects across millions of kilometers. "How?" Commander demanded, staring at sensor readings that contradicted everything in our scientific databases. "How can a primitive species achieve effects that our most advanced weapons cannot replicate?" I had been studying human behavior long enough to offer an explanation. "Desperation, Commander. They are not bound by conventional scientific caution. They are willing to attempt things our researchers would consider too dangerous to test. They are experimenting with forces that could destroy their own planet because they believe slavery is a fate worse than extinction." The demonstration had its intended effect. For the first time since the invasion began, I saw uncertainty in Commander's eyes. The humans had somehow managed to develop weapons that could potentially damage our fleet despite their technological inferiority. More concerning, they had demonstrated a willingness to use those weapons regardless of consequences to themselves. Intelligence reports from our ground forces painted an increasingly grim picture. Human resistance was not weakening over time. it was becoming more effective. Our soldiers, trained in conventional conquest operations, struggled against enemies who seemed to treat death as an acceptable outcome rather than something to be avoided. Humans fought with an intensity that our psychologists could not adequately explain. "They fight like cornered animals," reported Ground Commander OK, but with the tactical intelligence of seasoned military strategists. "They use weapons and tactics we have never encountered. They show no fear of death, only determination to inflict maximum damage before dying. They are unlike any species we have previously conquered." Individual human actions' rational explanation. Our forces encountered soldiers who deliberately triggered explosive devices while embracing troops, sacrificing their own lives to eliminate enemies. Scientists who destroyed their own research rather than allow it to be captured. Civilians who provided false information to our intelligence units, knowing they would be executed when discovered. Most disturbing were reports of humans who had somehow discovered ways to sabotage our advanced technology using primitive tools and materials. They were reverse engineering our equipment faster than our security protocols could prevent, then developing countermeasures and sharing that information across their global resistance networks. "Impossible," our engineering teams reported repeatedly. "Humans lack the theoretical knowledge to understand our technology. They should not be able to interfere with systems that operate on principles unknown to their science." Yet they continued doing exactly that. Human resistance fighters were disabling our vehicles, disrupting our communication arrays, and even developing weapons capable of penetrating our personal armor. They accomplished these feats not through superior technology, but through relentless experimentation and absolute disregard for their own safety during the testing process. Commander convened a strategy meeting with his senior officers on the 5th day of the standoff. The situation had deteriorated beyond anyone's expectations. Instead of a quick conquest followed by resource extraction, we were locked in a stalemate with enemies who seemed to become more dangerous with each passing day. "Recommendations," the commander demanded. "Immediate withdrawal," suggested Navigation Officer. "This species poses risks that outweigh potential benefits. Their resistance capabilities exceed acceptable parameters for conquest operations." "Orbital bombardment," countered Weapons Officer On. "Complete sterilization of the planet's surface. Eliminate the threat permanently." "Negotiated settlement," proposed Diplomatic Liaison. "Establish terms that allow resource extraction while preserving human autonomy. Minimize losses on both sides." Each option carried significant risks. Withdrawal would require explanation to the Empire about why a modern fleet had been defeated by primitives. Planetary sterilization would destroy valuable resources and set concerning precedents for future conquests. Negotiation acknowledged human legitimacy in ways that contradicted fundamental principles. I offered my own assessment. "With respect, Commander, I believe we are operating under false assumptions. We have approached this as a standard conquest operation against a primitive species. But humans are not primitive in the ways that matter for military conflict. They are primitive in technology, but advanced in something else, something our tactical databases have no category for." "Explain," Commander demanded. I had been preparing this analysis for days, trying to understand what made humans different from the hundreds of other species we had successfully conquered. Humans possess what they call fighting spirit, a psychological characteristic that causes them to become more dangerous when threatened rather than less dangerous. They have cultural mechanisms that transform individual survival instincts into collective resistance instincts. They view death in battle not as failure, but as honor. They consider freedom more valuable than life itself. The bridge fell silent as senior officers considered the implications. Finally, Commander spoke. "You are suggesting that humans cannot be conquered using conventional methods." "I am suggesting that conquering humans would require destroying everything that makes them human," I replied. "They will not submit. They will not adapt to slavery. They will fight until they are extinct. The question is whether we are prepared to commit genocide against an entire species to claim their resources." The commander's response was interrupted by priority alerts from our sensor arrays. Human forces were moving into position for something massive. Their remaining military units were converging on strategic positions around their planet. Their improvised space-based weapons were being powered up. Most ominously, their quantum cascade devices were being prepared for simultaneous detonation. The humans were done waiting. They had given us 5 days to reconsider our actions. Now they were preparing to implement their ultimate threat, regardless of consequences to themselves. A final transmission arrived from the human leadership. This is our last communication to the fleet. You have 30 minutes to begin withdrawal from our solar system. If any vessel remains in proximity to Earth after that deadline, we will detonate our planetary defense network. Your ships will be destroyed. Our planet will be uninhabitable. Neither species will survive this encounter. The choice is yours. Commander turned to me with an expression I had never seen before, genuine fear mixed with grudging respect. Your assessment, are they bluffing? I looked at the tactical displays showing human weapon positions, monitoring stations detecting the massive energy signatures of their improvised devices, communication intercepts revealing the absolute determination of their forces. After observing humans for months, studying their history, witnessing their response to invasion, I knew the answer with complete certainty. No, Commander, they are not bluffing. They mean exactly what they say. In 29 minutes, they will destroy themselves and take as many of us with them as possible rather than accept conquest. That is what humans do when given no alternative to slavery. The final 29 minutes felt like an eternity. I watched Commander struggle with a decision that would define his legacy and possibly determine the future of both our species. The bridge of our command vessel had fallen silent, except for the steady countdown displays showing human weapon charge levels, and the soft alerts from our communication arrays as more human messages arrived. These final transmissions were not threats or negotiations. They were something far more unsettling, personal messages from individual humans directed at our forces. Soldiers speaking to our soldiers, scientists addressing our research teams, even human children sending recordings to crew members. The content of these messages revealed something about human psychology that our experts had completely missed. These people, facing imminent death, were not expressing hatred for their enemies. They were expressing pity, sadness, something their language called regret that the situation had reached this point. One message particularly affected me. A human military officer speaking directly to our bridge crew said, "We know you are following orders just as we are. We know you have families waiting for your return just as we do. We take no pleasure in what must happen next. But we will not surrender our freedom, and we will not allow you to enslave our children. We hope your leaders learn from this encounter that some things are worth dying for." Another transmission came from a human scientist. "Our research suggests your species conquers others because you believe it demonstrates strength. We want you to understand that there is a different kind of strength. The strength to choose death over submission. The strength to fight impossible odds because the cause is just. The strength to sacrifice everything for principles that outlive individuals." Commander listened to these messages with growing agitation. "They speak as if they have already won," he observed. "How can a dying species claim victory?" I had begun to understand human logic during our long observation period. Because they are not fighting to survive, Commander. They are fighting to ensure their values survive. If we withdraw, those values survive. If we stay and they destroy both fleets, those values still survive as an example to other species. In human thinking, they cannot lose this conflict because their goals transcend individual survival. The tactical situation had become increasingly precarious as the deadline approached. Human forces had positioned their weapons in a configuration that our computers calculated would create overlapping destruction fields covering their entire solar system. Their quantum cascade devices, impossible though they seemed, were generating energy signatures that suggested they could indeed trigger the space-time distortions they threatened. More concerning were intelligence reports from our ground teams. Human resistance fighters had somehow infiltrated the security perimeters around several of our landed vessels. They were not attempting to capture or disable our ships. They were planting massive explosive devices designed to ensure maximum destruction when the final countdown reached 0. "They mean to take as many of us with them as possible," reported Ground Commander OK. "These are not random terrorist attacks. This is coordinated strategic planning designed to maximize casualties while minimizing the chance of survivors who might attempt retaliation against other human colonies." Other human colonies. That phrase triggered a realization that sent cold fear through my circulatory system. During our surveillance, We had detected scattered human settlements on other worlds throughout their solar system. Small research stations on Mars, mining operations in the asteroid belt, exploration probes heading to distant star systems. "Commander," I said urgently, "the humans we are fighting are not the entire human species. They have populations scattered across multiple worlds. If we engage in mutual destruction here, we eliminate only their primary population center while proving to all remaining humans that we are willing to commit genocide rather than respect their independence." Commander understood the implications immediately. Human colonies throughout their solar system and beyond would survive our mutual destruction, carrying with them the knowledge that forces had attempted to enslave their species and had been willing to commit planetary genocide when resisted. Any future encounter with humans would be colored by that knowledge. Survivors would carry tales of this encounter to other species, the commander realized. Our reputation for mercy and civilized conquest would be destroyed. Other primitive civilizations might choose resistance over submission if they believe we are willing to commit genocide. The strategic calculus was becoming clear. Humans had somehow maneuvered us into a position where every available option carried unacceptable consequences. Mutual destruction would damage prestige and create human survivors dedicated to revenge. Continued occupation would require resources we could not spare for indefinite warfare against enemies who fought like they welcomed death. But withdrawal would establish a precedent that primitive species could successfully resist conquest through determination and suicidal weapons. The Empire's reputation for invincibility would be shattered, potentially encouraging resistance movements across hundreds of conquered worlds. 15 minutes remained when humans demonstrated their final surprise. Instead of maintaining their threatening posture, they began transmitting detailed technical specifications for their quantum cascade weapons directly to our science teams. They were sharing the secrets of the impossible technology that had stalemated our invasion. "Why?" demanded Chief Scientist N, reviewing the incomprehensible data streams. "Why share weapon designs with enemies?" I studied the human transmissions and recognized the pattern from their historical communications. Because they want to ensure the technology is never used again, I realized. They are sharing the information so our scientists can develop countermeasures and defenses. They do not want other civilizations to face the choice between slavery and mutual destruction. The gesture was simultaneously generous and terrifying. Humans were essentially saying, "Here is how we created weapons that could have destroyed both our species. Learn from this technology so no one ever has to use it again." They were sharing their most dangerous secrets to ensure that future conflicts would not require such desperate measures. Commander stared at the data streams with something approaching awe. They are teaching us how to defend against their own ultimate weapon. Even facing extinction, they are concerned about the welfare of future civilizations. 10 minutes remained when the commander made his decision. "Signal all ships. Begin immediate withdrawal from the Sol system. Set course for the nearest outpost." "Sir," questioned his tactical officer, "the Empire will require explanation for our failure to complete conquest operations." "The Empire will receive a complete report documenting that this species poses unacceptable risks for standard conquest procedures," Commander replied. "Some civilizations cannot be conquered by conventional means. Some species are more dangerous as enemies than they are valuable as subjects." The withdrawal order transmitted to all vessels with 5 minutes remaining until the human deadline. I watched our invasion fleet slowly turn away from Earth, beginning the long acceleration toward hyperspace jump points. As we moved beyond the range of human weapons, I monitored their communications for signs of celebration or relief. Instead, I heard something unexpected. Human forces were not celebrating their victory. They were mourning their losses and beginning immediate disaster relief operations for their devastated cities. Their first priority was not military triumph, but caring for civilian survivors of our attacks. Within hours of our departure, humans were organizing reconstruction efforts, sharing resources between damaged regions, and providing medical assistance to wounded populations. The same species that had threatened mutual destruction was now demonstrating remarkable compassion for their own people. More surprising were the messages humans transmitted to our departing fleet. Not taunts or threats, but expressions of hope that future encounters between our species might be conducted under different circumstances. They wished safe travels for our crews and hoped we would convey accurate information about human capabilities to our leadership. "We bear no hatred for your people," one final message stated. "You are following orders from leaders who did not understand our nature. We hope this encounter provides educational value that prevents similar misunderstandings in the future. We look forward to eventual diplomatic contact when your empire is ready for relationships based on mutual respect rather than conquest." The return journey to space provided ample time to compile comprehensive reports about the human encounter. I spent weeks analyzing every aspect of their resistance, trying to understand how such a primitive species had successfully defended against our most advanced military technology. The answer lay not in their weapons or tactics, though both had been remarkably effective. Their true strength came from psychological characteristics that our military analysts had no framework for understanding. Humans possess the ability to transform individual fear into collective courage, to value abstract concepts more than personal survival, to become more dangerous when threatened rather than less dangerous. They had treated the invasion not as a military defeat to be endured, but as an existential challenge to their fundamental values. Their response was designed not merely to survive our attack, but to ensure that their core principles remained intact regardless of the outcome. Most significantly, humans had demonstrated that technological superiority did not guarantee military victory when facing enemies who were willing to sacrifice everything rather than accept defeat. They had found ways to make conquest more costly than withdrawal, even for a vastly superior force. My report to High Command recommended permanent classification of humans as a non-conquest species, not because they posed a military threat to the Empire, but because conquering them would require methods that contradicted fundamental principles about civilized warfare. "Humans cannot be enslaved because they would rather die than submit," I wrote in my final assessment. "They cannot be intimidated because they view death in battle as honorable. They cannot be broken because their strength comes from shared values rather than individual will. Any military operation against this species must be prepared for total warfare with an enemy that treats mutual destruction as an acceptable outcome." The High Command accepted my recommendations, though with obvious reluctance. Humans were designated as a special status species to be avoided unless they initiated hostile actions against interests. Future contact would be limited to diplomatic channels, conducted by specialists trained in human psychology. Years have passed since the Sol system encounter, and I have received periodic updates about human activities. They have continued expanding into space, establishing colonies on multiple worlds within their solar system. Their technology has advanced rapidly, particularly in areas related to space travel and defensive systems. More interesting are reports of human contact with other species. Unlike the Empire's conquest-based expansion, humans seem to prefer diplomatic relationships and trade agreements. They have shared technology with several primitive civilizations, helping them advance more quickly than would have occurred naturally. Some of those species have specifically requested human protection against potential expansion. They have heard stories about the species that successfully resisted our invasion and want similar capabilities for their own defense. The humans have honored these requests, providing both defensive technology and training in resistance tactics. They are essentially creating a network of civilizations capable of effective resistance against conquest-based expansion. I find myself respecting this approach, though it contradicts everything I was taught about proper species interaction. Humans treat other civilizations as equals worthy of independence rather than resources to be exploited. They share their knowledge freely rather than hoarding advantages. Most remarkably, they have kept their promise about the quantum cascade technology. Our scientists have confirmed that humans have destroyed their planet-killing weapons and shared countermeasure technology with every species they encounter. They seem genuinely committed to ensuring that future conflicts do not require such desperate measures. I often wonder what the galaxy would look like if the Empire had adopted human diplomatic principles instead of conquest-based expansion. How many civilizations might have joined us willingly rather than being forced into submission? How much knowledge and innovation might have been shared rather than suppressed? These questions trouble me during quiet periods of deep space patrol. I have seen the alternatives to conquest, and I am no longer certain the way represents the pinnacle of civilized behavior. Sometimes I receive communications from human explorers who have encountered vessels in neutral space. They always transmit friendly greetings and offers to share astronomical data or provide assistance if needed. They treat us as potential friends rather than former enemies. I have never responded to these communications, as regulations prohibit unofficial contact with non-conquest species. But I have kept recordings of their messages, and I study their language and customs during off-duty periods. Perhaps someday, when I retire from military service, I will find ways to communicate with humans as an individual rather than an officer. They seem like the kind of species that would welcome honest conversation about our shared experiences, even with former enemies. For now, I continue my duties and compile reports about other civilizations we encounter. But I measure every species against the standards set by humans during our invasion of their system. I ask myself, would these people fight to the death for their freedom? Would they sacrifice everything rather than submit to conquest? Would they show mercy to defeated enemies and share their knowledge for the benefit of all? Most species do not meet that standard. Most surrender when faced with superior force, accept conquest as inevitable, and integrate into the empire without significant resistance. But I have seen what happens when a species refuses to accept defeat, and I will never forget the lesson humans taught me. Some things are indeed worth dying for, and some civilizations deserve respect rather than conquest. I witnessed humanity's wrath, and I learned that true strength sometimes means choosing the hardest path rather than the easiest one. I will never forget it.